Several months ago, when we began the journey of spending each Sunday with me responding to the questions you raised, came to mind this week as I read the question that I'm going to respond to, and that was looking in the mirror. I had to say, Blake, you asked for it. For the question this week is challenging, it's complex, it's curious, it's contemplative, but central to our journey of faith. Volumes have been written, millions have pondered and wondered. A year-long study would only be a beginning, and I'm foolish enough to take a stab at it in 15 minutes. This is the question, and now I think you understand my beginning. Could we please discuss the concept of the bodily resurrection? I have long felt conflicted over the way the resurrection of Jesus has been presented in our churches. I want to begin with what I thought was going to be my concluding statement. But I want to begin with it so that everything I say will be sort of in the context of where I'm headed. And this week I want you to know where I'm headed first. Avery and Marsh they were a musical group which was invited to sing in Woodlawn United Methodist Church in Derby 50 years ago. The title of a song they wrote is Where I Begin. The song was entitled Something Happened Here. On Easter Sunday morning, something happened that changed the world. Then and now. The resurrection of Jesus is a spiritual mystery I cannot define, but I know it can be experienced. The life of Jesus, agape love, did not end in death. It lives on in the lives of those who follow him. Death did not end the story of divine agape love being experienced in the human community. Indeed, he lives in my heart, and I believe he lives in the heart of the faith community today. Now, this statement of faith for me involves three basic understandings. First of all, the resurrection of Jesus was first written by Paul, who was the first who wrote the books that were written first in the New Testament chronology, just a generation after Jesus' death. And he discussed the resurrection of Jesus in chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians. And he compared his experience with Jesus on the road to Damascus with the other narratives in the early church about Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, confronting individuals that led to their conversion to follow him. Indeed, he compared that experience with the experience of others and talked about it as a spiritual resurrection with no reference to the bodily resurrection of Jesus. Now, to be sure, later writings in the New Testament library refer to the bodily resurrection of Jesus, flesh and blood, but not Paul. And evidently in the early church, the flesh and blood resurrection of Jesus was not essential to the understanding of Jesus in the very early church. Secondly, there are two basic definitions of the word body in our Christian library. One is influenced by Greek thought. Greek thought analyzes everything. And for the Greeks, human life was made up of three component parts: body, flesh and blood, the soul, and the mind. And this Greek understanding is what it makes very easy to make the transition into Jesus experiencing a bodily flesh and blood resurrection. But there's another understanding and definition of body. And remember, Paul was a Hebrew, Paul was a Jew. And this Hebraic understanding of the word body was not flesh and blood, but one's persona. What made Jesus Jesus was resurrected. His persona. Persona is what makes Bruce different than any other human being that's ever lived. And this understanding of the resurrection of the body was that Jesus' resurrection was of his persona, a spiritual experience, not of flesh and blood. And finally, it's based on the understanding that resurrection requires death. You can't be resurrected unless one dies. And so, as one meets the physical end of their life in death, that whole person dies, but his or her persona lives on in the lives of those they loved and who loved them. Now, these three understandings enable me to believe and state that I believe in the resurrection of the body, the persona of Jesus, who lives on in the lives of those who follow him. And I believe that my persona will not end with death, but will live on in the lives of those I've loved and those who have loved me. You see, many Christians believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus, the flesh and blood. Others do not believe in the flesh and blood resurrection of Jesus, but rather in the resurrection of his persona. But both of those can say on Easter Sunday morning, something happened here that changed the world. For Jesus' life and teachings indeed were not concluded by death, but lives today. So let me return to where I began. Indeed, for me, not a prescription for you, but for me, something happened on Easter Sunday morning. And the resurrection is a spiritual mystery which I cannot define, but I can experience. For the life of Jesus, agape love, lives on. Beyond his death, the story of divine love being experienced in the human community is what the resurrection is all about. For indeed, he lives in my heart, and I believe in the heart of the faith community today. Again, not a prescription for you, but my story for you to hear. There's a lot to think about, but I've just got a couple of questions. First of all, what is your own experience concerning what you have been taught and learned in your journey of faith concerning the resurrection of Jesus? And secondly, what is your response to the understanding of body as a persona rather than flesh and blood? Thank you for sharing this time with us.